everybody. For the last 40 years, Seattle community colleges have commemorated the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. with special events held around his birthday. This year's event features a project to spark meaningful conversations, starting with 6 simple words. That's the premise behind a nationwide movement called the Race Card Project. It's the brainchild of NPR host and correspondent Michelle Norris, and it's received thousands of entries since its inception 3 years ago. Please welcome the event MC locally, former King 5 News reporter Tanya Mosley. Tanya, hi, it's so good to see you.
How you doing? Here again.
It's really nice to have you. Tell me a little bit more about this project and what the meaning behind it, the purpose behind it really is.
Great question. So Michelle Norris came up with this project just a few years ago, and the idea is that it will spark thought about race. And so 6 words, 1 sentence, the first thing that comes to your mind, and then from there have a dialogue with those around you about race. She didn't have any idea that it would be this successful. It's been phenomenal around the world.
And people can actually fill in a card.
That's right.
Where do they get the card?
So you can receive the card from online, but we will have an event this Friday marking Martin Luther King Jr. holiday, in which people will be able to take a card and write the 6 words and then just pop it in the mail.
Send it in.
Send it in, yeah.
And when you do this, I mean, I have my own theory, but when you do this sort of off the top of your head, or if you think about it, but you boil it down to 6 words, how does that help you focus your thinking?
Well, I think that, you know, when you first think of the first 6 words, it's kind of what's at the top of your mind. It's stream of consciousness. And so from there, that's probably what you really maybe burning question or thoughts or desires or feelings about it. And that's what you really want to talk about. When we censor ourselves and we take a moment and think it through, that's probably not the first thing that comes to your mind or came to your mind.
Right. And there are conversations these days, but they're often so heated or polarized or infused with politics that that moment to sit down and say, okay, what do I really think? And then to speak about it in a safe place is important, don't you think?
It's absolutely important. And the only way that we can move past maybe ideas that we have, ignorant thoughts, or things that we want to move past is to have that dialogue, to have that conversation.
Or maybe just questions we'd like to ask and have permission to ask, because it seems like the first moment you mention race, a veil comes down. Nobody wants to say anything hurtful or dumb, and so, you know, oftentimes the kind of thing that we might talk about as, even as friends and coworkers, we're not going to talk about around race. When you thought about this, did you learn new things doing it this way?
Well, I'll tell you, I produced a piece called Black in Seattle, so it was a 4-part series. Michelle Norris came up with this a few years ago, but I think what was really great, and you touched on it, is it's giving people permission to have the discussion. And I really didn't think initially that people really wanted to talk about it, but it wasn't until I started to delve deeper that I saw that it was right at the forefront for many people. They stop me on the street. They want to have these real discussions. They say, for the first time I had a chance to sit down with a coworker, a Black coworker, Asian coworker, and bring up topics that I was afraid to talk about previously. Yeah.
I think that's important. Having our first African-American president has obviously, you know, had its good points in going through barriers that we haven't had been able to pierce before, but it's also kind of dredged up some unpleasantness in terms of the racism that exists throughout the country in many areas. And so, you know, this idea of sitting down to have a real conversation seems to me like it's very, very important. What will happen Friday at the event?
So Michelle Norris will be in town, which is a great treat for Seattle residents.
Absolutely, she's great.
Isn't she? So there'll be civic leaders, regular folks like you and I there, commemorating the Martin Luther King Jr. holiday. But they'll also be able to take a race card, write the first 6 words, and then after the program have a dialogue with each other, sit down at different tables and have discussions about some of the things that they wrote on their cards.
It's interesting that she decided to go ahead and call this race card, you know, because that has also been such a charged term that, you know, I find sometimes infuriating depending on how it's used and the way it's used. Most often I find it infuriating, actually, to be perfectly honest. And so that gets that out there also to be discussed and to try to break this down a little bit. And oftentimes, if you know, that good old golden rule, if we can just kind of get down to understanding how other people feel, why they feel that way, what adjustments we could make to have a more peaceable interaction, and kind of take the the rancor out of so much of this. That would be something I'd really like to see. On the other hand, you have a 10-month-old baby, right? I've got a 21-year-old kid, and I have to say they are so much smarter than we were growing up about so many things.
They are.
That gives me a lot of hope.
It does. I have a 6-year-old as well, and the discussions we have around race are so pure and so profound at the same time.
Right.
Yes.
And so accepting. There's,
so
you know, there isn't as much institutional barrier for getting to know your peers and your friends and your classmates, and that's a joy to see, because I grew up in West Texas in the 70s, and we were nothing but barriers, man. It's a wonder we had any room to move around for all the barriers there were.
When we talk about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s message, it was a message of equality. But I think somewhere along the way we thought that also meant that we can't have a discussion about race.
Right.
But what kids teach us is that we can actually sit down and talk about our differences. That doesn't mean that we're not equal.
Right. He talked about the basic human worth of the individual.
Absolutely.
And you know, above it all, being judged on the content of our character rather than the color of our skin. And I really don't know how anyone could argue with that.
Yes.
At the end of the day.
That's right.
Friday is going to be a fun day, and I look forward to, you know, hearing about it from you and all of the participants, but I really congratulate you on all the work you've done around this.
I'm excited, and I'm excited to read those race cards.
I am too.
Yeah.
You should come back and talk to us some more about this.
Absolutely.
It'll be very interesting. Tanya, thank you very
much.
Thank you. The celebration of Dr. King is Friday, January 17th at noon at Mount Zion Baptist Church in Seattle. Michelle Norris will be there, as we mentioned, along with award-winning Greater Works Chorale, and the Reverend Samuel McKinney Scholarship will be presented, and much more. You can find event details and links to the Race Card Project and Tanya's Black in Seattle series on our website. We invite you to share your thoughts, your 6 simple words, on our Facebook page as well. We'll be right back.